Welcome to my podcast, Jack to the Future. From science and inventions to pollution and recycling, I talk about what's changing in the world, the future, and how we can help with that. Every month I'll talk about a different future theme. For example, the future of science, tech, sustainability, reading, music, and all sorts of other ones. The future of everything. Did you know? You can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Jed to the Future, and on YouTube as Jack to the Future. Follow me to get behind the scenes info, access to the previews about my next episodes, and much, much more. You may remember, back in June last year, I interviewed somebody from the National Trust about the future of forests. If you haven't heard the episode, it's episode 8, so check it out. Back then, we talked about the forests in the UK and how deforestation and climate change is affecting them. Well, this week's episode is a part 2 of the future of forests, and this time I'm talking to Vicki Lonnon, who works for Airbus and is the Quality Assurance Manager for a very special project. The European Space Agency have asked Airbus to design and make a new satellite that will monitor forests from space using a special radar that's never been used before, and it will look at how much carbon is being stored by the forests and how this is changing over time by scanning through forest canopies and building a 3D map of the world's forests. Wow, that's impressive. Keep on listening to find out more. Before I begin today, I just wanted to ask for your help. Jack to the Future is part of Kids Listen, which is a non-profit organisation made up of people like me who love to make podcasts for children and families. We are committed to ensuring high-quality standards when it comes to your family's entertainment, and we want to learn from you. We are currently running a survey to help understand your family's listening habits, interests, and more. If you are able to complete the survey, it will help us to learn so that we can continue to meet the high standards your family deserves. It'll only take a minute or two. Please go to the link in the podcast description or the link in our bio on social media. Thank you. Anyway, back to forests. Trees and plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air and use a process called photosynthesis to sort of capture the carbon, and then the plants use it to build tree trunks, bark and leaves. Forests absorb and store lots of carbon, but fires, deforestation and other human activity lead to that carbon being released back into the atmosphere. That is not good. The satellite mission that Vicki is talking about today is getting better information and knowledge about the role of forests in either letting off or emitting carbon dioxide when trees are cut down and destroyed. That's bad. Or taking up carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere when they grow. Good, yay! At the moment, we don't really exactly know the amount of carbon dioxide that's being given off by forests as a result of human activity like deforestation. So basically this mission, which is called the Biomass Mission, will give us a better idea of the role that forests play in climate change and how much carbon is being released into our atmosphere, as well as giving us a more accurate idea on the health of our forests so that we can act quicker to look after our planet. The satellite will do this by measuring the amount of biomass in the Earth's forests. So what is biomass? I got a bit confused here, because you may have heard in episode 7 of STEM to the Future, I spoke to a lady who used to be an innovation engineer at a company called Drax, who made wood pellets, which they called wood biomass pellets. At first, when Mum said we were talking to Vicki about the Biomass Mission, I was like, but we've done this before. When you walk through the forest, biomass is everywhere. Biomass is the amount of living things in a forest. The largest part of biomass is in the trunks and large branches of trees, and around half of this biomass consists of carbon. So it may seem like the two podcasts are sort of similar, because I guess they both talk about biomass, but the main difference is that the other podcast episode was about using the energy from burning wood, biomass pellets, as a source of fuel instead of fossil fuels like gas and oil. This episode isn't about burning wood, it's about looking at any biomass in the forest, which could be trees, plants and microorganisms and animals, and seeing how much carbon they're storing. And if humans destroy those living things, we want to see how much carbon is released back into the atmosphere. Right, so now that we have that all straight, it's time to make Vicki to find out more. Just to apologise, the audio in this episode isn't brilliant. The internet signal was a bit iffy, but hopefully you'll still be able to understand what Vicki and I are talking about. I'd like to welcome my special guest today, Vicki Lonnon, who works for a company called Airbus. Hi Vicki, thanks for joining me.
Hello. Hi, Jack.
What is Airbus and what do you do there?
Okay, so Airbus itself is a very large company, and we have lots of different activities that are going on within the Airbus group of companies. So the company aspect that I work for is called Airbus Defence and Space, and that's in Stevenage in the UK. We've got sites all over Europe and the UK, and we focus here particularly on building spacecraft and space projects.
Yeah, that sounds really, really cool. We looked on your website and it looks really, really cool with all the new spacecraft.
Yeah, so we're probably one of the kind of 3 or 4 largest space companies within the UK and Europe, working on many of the large missions over the years. The other aspect of the Airbus companies where we'll build aircraft, helicopters, things like that, but that's not the aspect of the company that I work in. I work purely in the space side of things.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are sometimes still surprised to find out that somewhere so local to them is doing something quite so cool, building satellites. But yeah, so you're about 20 minutes down the road from us.
I saw that huge building that said Airbus on it.
Yep, so that's us. That's where I'm talking to you from today.
So who asked you to do this project? Was it a space agency?
Yeah, the European Space Agency.
What is forest biomass?
Okay, so biomass is basically everything that constitutes the forest. So you're not just talking about kind of the treetops and the canopy, talking the leaves, the tree trunks, the tree bark, every branch, everything that is the trees, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Why is the Biomass Project important for the future of climate change?
As you know, the forests are very important for climate change because they act as a kind of carbon sink, if you like. So a lot of the trees are essentially taking in lots of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and absorbing it and storing it within the trunks, within the bark, the branches, the leaves, etc. But also over time, one, due to kind of deforestation. So we've got a lot of deforestation going on in the world. We have fewer and fewer forests to be able to store carbon. And also through local just degradation of forests, we're finding that basically the forest is now giving out carbon dioxide. So if you deforest by clearing forests and burning, all of that carbon that is stored within those trees that have been cut down is now being released back into the atmosphere. So it's been generated once, it's been absorbed by the trees, and now all of that stored carbon is basically being released back into the atmosphere, which is a real problem for climate change and global warming. So the forests are playing a really key part in helping us to manage the carbon cycle. But as I say, the forest degradation, deforestation, particularly around the tropical regions, is now becoming a bit of a problem. And it's actually now potentially exacerbating climate change.
I agree. It is a massive problem. I did an episode on the future of forests where I interviewed someone from the National Trust and I talked about deforestation. I also watched a film about how important soil is and how the carbon cycle and how we need to keep the carbon in the ground.
What we need to do is be able to quantify properly the changes that those forests are undergoing and therefore the implications for the climate. And at the moment, the measurements that you can take are pretty poor. So lots of different measurements have been made from the ground, some from other missions in space, which have been able to just tell you about rough things about the health of vegetation and where there's vegetation, but they can't penetrate through the canopy layer. So it's very, very difficult to see through the dense forest canopies and see down into the tree trunk bark kind of level and see the depth of the biomass. And there's very, very little data about that at the moment.
So what you're saying is, up until now, we had no way of really knowing how much carbon the forest is keeping or giving off, and if what we're doing to try and climate change is working.
So that's what the Biomass Mission is all about. We're actually using a special kind of instrument that can see right through the canopy down to the forest floor and build up a picture of what that whole topography looks like going up from the forest floor all the way to the top of the canopy.
Yeah, that's a lot of knowledge I just took in there. I learned about the different layers of forest at school as well. That links. It makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why can't we just monitor forest biomass on the ground rather than in space?
It's very, very difficult to get that view. So, if you're just looking at an aerial view, it would be very tricky to properly monitor it. If you look at the size of the Amazon basin, for example, in terms of the size, and it's just not feasible to easily map that area from ground. Basically, it would take so long and it would be very, very complicated that you're essentially just spending a lot of time trying to actually do that from the ground. As I say, in the past, we've often used other different missions to essentially see different parts in the canopy area, but this is the first time that we'll be able to actually see through the canopy. And also because of cloud, so the tropical regions are often covered by a lot of cloud, and most imagery can't really penetrate the cloud either. So in order to do this, we're making use of this Pband synthetic aperture radar.
Why is it so special?
This Pband radar, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, which I'm sure you've looked at a little bit in school, at one end you've got things like gamma rays and X-rays, yeah? So you know which one I'm talking about. So you've got your X-rays at one end, it's very, very short wavelengths. And then right down the other end, past the visual spectrum, you've got really, really, really long wavelength, kind of like your microwave radio frequencies, infrared and stuff like this. And each one has specific uses. And in radar, there's different bands of radar that you can use. And this one in particular is called Pband. That's just the name of the band of radar. And the wavelength that we're using is around 70 centimetres. So if you think of a wave that's 70 centimetres, you're talking almost over half a metre. So these are really, really long wavelengths. It's a really long wavelength to be using. So that signal can actually penetrate right through the entire forest layer, go straight through the canopy, go through cloud, all the way down to the floor. And that means that what we get scattered back from the floor when we essentially irradiate the forest like that, we get a return signal back to our reflector in space, and the scattering that comes back enables us to essentially build up a full picture of the tomography of the forest, which is basically we'll be able to overlay different images. So we take several images, we then overlay them, and it builds up a full 3D picture right from the floor to the canopy.
That's cool.
We've never been able to do before.
That's really, really cool, yeah. I've learnt about radio waves through my podcast when I talked about the future of radio.
Yeah, and it's all part of the same spectrum, so it's all...
What does the message that you get back from the satellite look like? Do the bits with lots of carbon show up in a different colour or something?
What it does is we build up kind of a tomography map, and essentially by then estimating the size of the biomass, you can say, okay, this is how much carbon is being essentially stored, and quantify it because you know how big the areas are.
Yeah. The more dense the layers are with plants and stuff, the more carbon there would be because they need carbon dioxide to live. Is there any bits of the trees that you're most interested in?
Yeah, all the tree trunk, sizes of the tree trunks, because the tree trunk is basically just a carbon storage area.
I didn't know that. How does it deploy its reflector?
We have our satellite body and we have the instruments, which is the Pband radar. Now, in order to actually be able to kind of send the signals back and forth for the radar, we have a huge 12-metre reflector that is on an arm, and it's all stowed like an umbrella at launch. And then once we get into space, there's basically a sequence to unfurl it. Basically, it's folded all up, and over a series of different manoeuvres, the whole thing opens out. So the arm opens out, and then it deploys the boom, and then the reflector itself unfurls slowly, and it's like putting an umbrella up.
That's cool, yeah. It's like the top bit like opens up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is the reflector needed?
Basically, without the reflector, we can't amplify the transmit signals, and we can't effectively gather the scatter of the signals coming back from the forest. So basically they scatter back towards us, and the reflector is there to capture all of that scattered reflection and then focus that back to our receiving chain on the instrument.
Yeah.
If you've got a satellite dish on the side of your house, you put something towards it and it enables it to capture from a wider area.
Yeah.
As you get signals coming in and out.
Mm-hmm. Has the mission launched yet?
No, not yet. We're in the final stages of building the satellite here in Stevenage. We will be getting our reflector soon. We'll be getting our instrument soon. And then we're finally putting those last parts onto the satellite. The rest of the satellite is here built and being tested. And then we go to our satellite testing campaign because we have to actually put it through a rigorous set of tests. So we simulate the launch environment, which is lots of shaking, basically, and really, really noisy in something called an acoustic test. And then we also do a thermal check, as best we can, a kind of vacuum environment. So we put them in big chambers. This happens for all satellites. We put it in a big chamber and we make it a vacuum, basically, inside the chamber, and then we can run the satellite and make sure that everything that it functions properly within those temperatures in a vacuum environment. Because a satellite itself, all satellites like to work at around about room temperature, all the electronics. And when you go into space, you're in a background temperature of around 3 Kelvin, which is very, very cold. You're talking kind of the minus 170s plus temperature in space.
Sheesh, that's cold.
So it's very cold, and we have to be able to basically keep all of the electronics at room temperature. So you're talking 25 to 30-ish degrees. We do a full check to make sure that we can power everything on and that all the temperatures are as they're supposed to be and the spacecraft is working properly. And we also do what we call electromagnetic compatibility checks with all the different boxes you've got inside a satellite. As you might know, with computers and things, everything generates a bit of a signal. So you will always get some kind of signal. And if you have too many devices all in one location, they might start to interfere with each other. So we do a full suite of checks to make sure that nothing interferes with anything else on the satellite and that all the signals are going where they're meant to, and we don't get any interference coming from anything else. We've got that to come. And then we go off to our launch campaign, and we meet our rocket, get put inside the fairing, put on top of the rocket, and then it's off into space.
That's a really cool design. Quite ironic, really, as we're talking about interference. There's a bit of connection loss. And your voice sounded a bit distorted. I read that they can also monitor ice caps and how much they've melted. Is there anything else it monitor?
Yeah, so the primary mission is obviously mapping the forests, but there's plenty of other things that you can do with the Pband radar. So we're also going to be looking at maybe mapping subsurface geology in the desert, the ice structure of the ice sheets, and also, the forest floors. So it offers so much opportunity to measure lots of different, should we say, natural structures on the Earth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Not just forest.
Do you think we'll reach net zero by 2030?
2030? Let's hope we're on a good way on our way, especially given the current heat waves and the fact that this could become the norm. Is quite scary. Yeah,
I really hope it would end up being actually sooner than 2030, because I hope everybody does a little bit to help the environment and reach net zero. How will the data that the satellite collects be used?
The scientific community will then use the data in their climate modelling and to hopefully inform governments and policy in the future. We're looking at a launch sort of 2023, 2024.
Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for talking about the satellite that you've been working on. I'm really excited when that happens, because that'll be really, really good and it'll be better for the environment.
See you, Jack.
Bye. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. The episode has been really interesting, but I know that some of it seems a bit complicated too. Don't worry though, in the description of this podcast, Mum has put the link to 2 really good videos which can explain it too. As well as hopefully gathering some really useful information which should help us on our target for net zero and looking after our planet, it will be really cool if we can find some information that we've never been able to find before, like what's under the ground in deserts. When the mission launches, we should be able to track it as well, and before you know it, we'll be able to see that 3D map. Looking on the European Space Agency's website, the launch is planned for 2023 from South America on the Vega rocket. Exciting! Join me next time for another exciting episode of Jack to the Future.